Over to you, Kate. Thank you so much for joining our I Care and You webinar series.
Thank you very much, Bhavini. Hello, everybody. I'm Kate Arkell, Research Development Manager at Retina UK. I am going to talk not very much about research, actually. I'm going to give you a bit of, as Bhavini said, an overview of the conditions that come under our umbrella, and talk to you a little bit about what Retina UK does. But as Bhavini said, do feel free to ask questions at the end, and I will do my best to answer them. I am going to share my screen because I've got some very simple slides to go along with my talk. They are mainly because I don't like looking at myself in the middle of the screen, but they are very, very simple slides, and I will describe them as I go along. They don't contain a great deal of information, so don't worry too much about them. So Retina UK is, I've got to work out how to change my slides. There we go. Retina UK is the only UK charity dedicated solely to genetic eye conditions that cause damage to the retina at the back of the eye. So the retina is the part of the eye that detects light and converts it into an electrical signal that can be passed to the brain, and then the brain can interpret that as an image. So damage to the retina therefore leads to sight loss. And this group of conditions together is called inherited retinal dystrophies, or inherited retinal diseases sometimes. So I've put on a slide that's got a red umbrella at the top, and under the umbrella I've put the names of various different conditions that are all inherited retinal dystrophies. So some of the specific conditions under the umbrella include retinitis pigmentosa, or RP. That usually causes loss of peripheral vision and low light vision to start with before progressing to central vision loss later on. I've got Stargardt disease there and Best disease. Those two are the other way round and primarily affect central vision first. I've got Leber congenital amaurosis, which causes severe and early onset sight loss. So that usually starts in infancy or early childhood. Choroideremia affects the blood vessels supplying the back of the eye, and there's a fairly lengthy list of other conditions too, some of which are very rare. Some people might be told at diagnosis that they have rod-cone dystrophy or cone-rod dystrophy. I think of these as sort of slightly less precise diagnoses. So the light sensitive cells in the retina include rod-shaped cells, which are mostly in the periphery of the retina and are good at seeing in low light, and cone-shaped cells, which are concentrated in the middle of the retina and are responsible for our central high-definition colour vision. If someone is told that they've got rod-cone dystrophy, it basically means that their ophthalmologist has identified that their rod photoreceptor cells are degenerating ahead of their cones, so their peripheral vision is more affected than their central vision. If they're told they have cone-rod dystrophy, it's the other way around, and the cones are degenerating first. But they're kind of umbrellas, really. So, for example, RP is a rod-cone dystrophy. Stargardt disease is a cone-rod dystrophy. There are also some inherited syndromes that affect other body systems as well as the eyes, but include retinal degeneration as a symptom. So those include things like Usher syndrome, which often involves hearing loss as well as sight loss, and Bardet-Biedl syndrome, which can cause kidney disease and learning difficulties, and some other symptoms as well, all alongside sight loss. So the thing that all of these conditions have in common, not only that do they affect the back of the eye, but they are all caused by a fault or a spelling mistake, if you like, in the genetic code that leads to a crucial component of the retina not working properly. So my next slide, I've written two sentences. I've put at the top of the slide the sentence, "Put the frog on the log." And then underneath, I've just made one change to that sentence to put the frog on the dog. So only one letter has changed, but the meaning is quite different. And at the bottom of the slide, I've got a picture of a little dog with a frog costume on. So it is just one change that really changes the outcome of what goes on at the back of the eye. And that tiny spelling mistake, that fault, could be in any one of almost 300 different genes that have been identified to date as being associated with inherited retinal conditions. So a gene is a unit of genetic information that provides the instructions for building one particular type of protein in the body. So proteins are our building blocks. They give rise to all the structures in our cells and tissues, and they also perform a vast array of other biological functions. The retina is a really complex tissue. It's very, very busy. There's a lot going on in there. So it's not surprising that so many different genes and proteins play crucial roles upon which our sight depends. And it only takes one of those to go wrong for our vision to be affected. Even retinitis pigmentosa alone can be caused by faults in any one of around 100 genes. So 2 people with RP could have completely different underlying genetic causes and underlying disease mechanics for their condition. So that could potentially have really important implications for the way those 2 individuals are treated in the future. A treatment that works for one might not work for the other. So it is worth considering trying to find out exactly which gene is causing inherited sight loss, if you have it, in case an appropriate treatment comes along in the coming years. And I will briefly touch on research a little bit later. So if you're living with an inherited sight loss condition of any kind, actually, you are entitled to an NHS genetic test that can look for your faulty gene. That involves giving a small blood sample, just like a normal blood test, and your ophthalmologist or GP can refer you for that. And they can also refer you for NHS genetic counselling. Genetic counselling isn't like psychological counselling that we're perhaps all a bit more familiar with. Genetic counsellors are experts in discussing choices and implications around genetic testing. They're very good at explaining genetic test results, because those can sometimes be a little bit complex, and they're very good at advising on the likelihood of children inheriting a particular condition. So some people with inherited retinal conditions have a parent and perhaps also a handful of other relatives with the same condition. And then in other families, it seems to crop up out of the blue. In some families, it may only be the males that are affected. And this is all because of different inheritance patterns. So different ways in which the condition is passed down through families, which again stems from the fact that these conditions can be caused by different genes and even different spelling mistakes within those genes. So to explain a bit about inheritance patterns, we all have 2 copies of every gene. One from our mum and one from our dad. For some genes, it only takes 1 copy of the gene to be faulty to lead to significant problems. So in these cases, the condition crops up fairly regularly in a family, because there's a 50% chance of each child inheriting the faulty gene from an affected parent. This is called dominant inheritance. So I've put on the screen a slide that shows a family group with various different generations. So with a dominant condition, the condition can crop up again and again, perhaps in a grandparent, an uncle, a child, all over the place. For other genes, both copies of the gene need to be faulty to produce any symptoms. That means that both mum and dad of the affected person would carry 1 faulty copy each, but the chances are that neither of them will actually have any symptoms, and neither will their parents or grandparents. It's only when those 2 faulty copies happen to come together in their child that the problem occurs. So it can seem to families a little bit like this is just cropped up out of the blue. And we call this inheritance pattern recessive inheritance. So on the slides, I've got lots of identical little blue cartoon figures and one green one all alone, because that one person has just suddenly appeared in the family with an inherited retinal condition. If you have a recessive condition yourself, your children will be carriers of the faulty gene, but are extremely unlikely to actually have any symptoms of sight loss. And then some genes associated with sight loss are found on the X chromosome, which is one of the sex chromosomes. So females have 2 X chromosomes. So if one of their X's has a faulty gene, the healthy copy of that gene on the other X can normally compensate. Males, on the other hand, only have 1 X. Their other sex chromosome is the Y chromosome, which is actually really small and doesn't have very much genetic information at all. So that means that if there's a faulty gene on the X, there isn't another healthy copy to compensate. And the man or boy ends up with sight loss. So I've put up a slide that's just got, it's actually a picture from the comedy programme 2.5 Men, if anybody of you have ever seen that, but 2 men and a little boy. And it'll only be the men in a family who are affected. This type of inheritance is actually quite common in RP and is referred to as X-linked retinitis pigmentosa, or you might hear it described as XLRP. Choroideremia is another X-linked condition. So men with X-linked conditions will actually not pass the condition on to their sons. But beyond that, it gets a bit more complicated. So I'll signpost you to a bit more information and can take some questions at the end. If you see a genetic counsellor, they will spend some time talking about your family history with you to try and establish the inheritance pattern for your family. And that can give a really good indication of what the inheritance pattern is. But sometimes the only way to be sure is to have a genetic test to try and find out exactly which gene is involved, how it's behaving, and the nature of the fault in that gene. I'm just going to see how we're doing for time. I think we're doing okay. So I'll just go into a little bit more detail about genetic tests. So I just wanted to say that for people with inherited retinal conditions, a genetic test is actually not guaranteed to return a clear result. So in around 25 to 30% of cases, the genetic scientists who interpret the outcome of the test can't identify with certainty the genetic fault that's causing the condition. That's because researchers actually still haven't identified all the genes that can cause inherited retinal conditions, despite us being at around 300 and counting. And also they don't yet fully understand the significance of all the spelling mistakes and the spelling differences within some of the genes we do know about. So genetic code varies enormously between individuals. It's part of what makes us all different. And there are also a vast number of tiny differences between our genetic code that have pretty much no consequences. So that means it takes a lot of work for researchers to be sure that a change they see in the code is definitely the cause of a particular condition. That said, having a genetic test is still worth considering. It's more likely to return a result than not. And scientists are still working all the time on understanding all the different genetic changes. So more and more people will get a clear result in the future. And Retina UK is currently funding a research project on that. So that's kind of a summary of inherited retinal conditions and a little bit about different types and the way they're inherited. So I'll just go on to talk a bit about what Retina UK can offer if you or somebody you support is living with one of these conditions. First of all, we have a fantastic helpline team who are all volunteers and are all personally affected by one of our conditions. So they really do understand what it's like if you just want a listening ear. And they also have a wealth of knowledge about practical issues, from driving and benefits to sunglasses. They'll also do their best to respond to queries about research or treatments, but they can also pass queries on to the office or to me if needed. So they really are a really great first port of call. I think I have got a slide up that has the phone number on for the helpline, which is 0300 111 4000, or you can email them at helpline@retinauk.org.uk. We can also offer some ongoing support rather than just a one-off call to the helpline. We can also put you in touch with a volunteer from our talk and support service. So you can speak to that person on a regular basis, which you'd arrange between you, and that can offer you just a bit more ongoing support. Some people like to get together with others living with similar conditions. And if that's you, you might want to consider one of our local peer support groups. Bhavini can tell you lots more about the London group, as she looks after that for us, but we have lots of others around the country as well. Some of them still meet online, which some people find really convenient. Others are starting to get together in person again because people like that direct contact. So it really sort of varies by group. We do have actually a national peer support group, which is online only because it's people from all over the country. And if there isn't somewhere, if you can't get out to a group or you want that contact on a more regular basis, you can find out about that as well. We've got lots of sources of information. Our website is a really good place to start, which is www.retinauk.org.uk. But we've also got a whole range of audio resources, including podcasts and webinars. So I suggest you check out the Retina UK channels on YouTube, Spotify, Anchor FM, or wherever else you get your podcasts. We produce a community magazine 3 times a year with articles on research and community activity, and that's also available electronically or in audio format. We have an information resource specifically about genetics and genetic testing and counselling. That's called Unlock Genetics. I think, yeah, I've got a slide there as well. So I've put up a slide that shows the homepage of Unlock Genetics. It's like a little extra bit tagged on to our website, which is kind of self-contained. There's lots of information on here about genetic testing and counselling, and you can find that at www.retinauk.org.uk/genetics, or we can provide it from the Retina UK office in large print hard copy if you prefer that, or as an audio in audio format. We can send that out on CD or on a memory stick. So Bhavini mentioned that we have quite a new resource which is all focused on mental health and emotional well-being. So we understand that being diagnosed and living with a progressive sight loss condition can be really life-changing, with loss of confidence, anxiety and stress, the biggest emotional or psychological impacts. So we did surveys of our community in both 2019 and 2022, and those showed that 93% of the people who responded said that they had experienced these negative impacts on their emotional well-being. So that prompted us to produce our new resource, and the aim of it is to get people thinking proactively about their emotional well-being as well as their physical well-being. We want to sort of normalise the conversation, if you like, about how people are feeling, and provide people with the knowledge, tools and support and confidence to help them avoid some of the more drastic emotional impacts of living with sight loss, and simply to be able to cope better with day-to-day ups and downs. We've worked with a mental health organisation and people living with inherited sight loss to produce this online resource. It's called Discover Wellbeing. You can find out more and access the resource at retinauk.org.uk/wellbeing. I'm not sure if we've got any professionals with us today, but there is also a CPD accredited module for professionals as well. You can perhaps tell any professionals you come into contact with about it. So that's kind of a quick overview of everything we have to offer at Retina UK. There is lots going on in research with inherited retinal dystrophies. It's actually getting quite hard to keep up with all of the clinical trials going on around the world and all the various different approaches to treatment. There is one treatment available for a small minority of people with inherited retinal conditions. That's a gene therapy, and it's specifically for people whose sight loss is caused by faults in a gene that's called RPE65. So the only people who can access that treatment are those who've had a genetic test and know that that gene is the cause of their sight loss. However, there are lots of other gene therapies being looked at as well for other genes, and lots of other different approaches too, including a sort of stem cell-like therapies, therapies that involve just taking a medicine, like a more traditional medicine, and all sorts of other things like that. So I'm really happy to take any questions. If people want to ask a little bit more about the research that's going on, then really happy to talk about that now. And I've just realised as well, I've got a slide here that shows the homepage of Discover Wellbeing as well. So yeah, do please go and check that out. It's obviously relevant to anybody living with sight loss, whether they've got inherited retinal condition or not. So yeah, have a think about that. That is just about me. I've realised that's only taken 25 minutes, Bhavini. I'm really sorry.
No, don't apologize. Thank you so much. That was really informative. And just going back to your slide, I feel like that little green person on its own, because I am the one in my family with retinitis pigmentosa.